I'm in the process of um, completing or refining the 3D representation of this building. You can learn a lot from photographs of the building within or without. So one of the things that's especially useful are pictures of interiors, looking into corners, or anything explaining openings and the relationship of those openings to the floor levels. So we're looking at a second floor opening with an arch over it, and we just finished modeling some provisionally some representation of the arch. Couple things we notice that's different from picture and our 3D representation here is that quite clearly the window height is not properly represented in this drawing, and the sill is probably too close to the ground. So generally speaking, that opening should move upwards and occupy almost to the point, to the top of the apex of the arch here, if you see that. So I suspect that all the openings are made on the second floor will need to be moved upwards, that is on the z-axis, and probably stretch. The height might be shorter. Let's see what we've got here. We've got 12 feet. I think what we want is a sill of maybe 12 or 24 inches, and then a height of 12 or 13 feet within that. So I'm going to go back to a point of view where we can adjust the window openings on the Berkeley side of the building and the opposite, the reverse side, the blind side that's facing the next building adjacent to it. Let's see what we have for scenes. We might as well develop one. So I'm going to go to the isometric overall view of the model, just sort of looks at everything with everything on. Right? Because I want to adjust the openings on this part of the facade. I'm going to go to a front view. So here's a front view. And I'm going to save this as a scene. And call it, let's rename it, let's call it Elevation View, Berkeley Street. Or that might be an east elevation, whatever, we can name it afterwards. If I turn on if I change the style to X-ray, I should be able to see the arches that I modeled through, right? So consider what I'm doing here, what I'm selecting and what I'm modifying. If I double-click the walls and I draw the selection fence around all these windows. I have 160 entities. What's 160 entities? Really, it's everything associated with those openings. Right? And because I'm inside the group, so consider this. I have 160 things selected. I can move them vertically, so the openings can go up or down. So I do need to do that, at least do that. So let me move upwards on the blue axis 24 inches to accommodate the sills. Right. Let's go back to a front view and consider now we will fence select just the upper part of the window. There are 50 entities. How are there 50 entities? Let's explain that. We've selected all the lines that form the top of that opening. So there are 5 lines for each window that form that rectangle that's the top of the rough opening. So that's 4 lines that form the rectangle and the face. So each window selection is 5, and we've selected 10 windows. So we're going to take those things and move them upwards into that arch. So I'm just going to select on the face, approximately move upwards the z-axis, and you see how in the picture let's make sure I'm on the blue axis. So I've locked that in place. In the picture, the height of that window is seen just beyond the arch. So those windows are taller, and they're taller by about that height. Naturally, we're going to have to make adjustments on the north and south windows as well. But I think that will effectively fix the heights in the window on the second floor. And third floor, there's more room between the sill and top of the window. So I'm going to select a fence around. I should show up another 160 entities, and I'll move those upwards 2 feet. 24. So now the proportions of the building are going to start to be more in line with actuality, with reality. All right? Go back to front view. Let's turn off the visibility of the BRA model. I think I have it on a layer. I mean, I know I have it on a layer. BRA building model. Just turn that off. And I'm going to save this view because it's going to be useful. So I'm going to save this scene as elevation front X-ray. So we have some useful visibility parameters. Let's now go to the left or the right view. Okay. So we know we need to raise both sets of windows on these facades 24 inches so the sills meet. $320 entities, right? That makes sense. It was $160 to select 10 windows. So now I'm selecting all the windows on the north and south elevation. I'm going to move them in the Z direction on the blue axis 24 inches. We don't know for certain what the heights of those are yet, but I'm just sort of adjusting things so that we have them roughly in place. Right. Let's go back to the right elevation. So the right elevation, this is Berkeley Street, so the right elevation, I'm looking at the north elevation. So I'm going to save that as elevation. North elevation is Newbury Street. Newbury X-ray. Cool. And it's right. If I go to the left, this is the elevation I see on Boylston Street. So let's add elevation Boylston. I mean, I'm keeping the style setting with the elevation. Finally, I'm going to save as 19, and let's just call this refinements. There are other modifications I will want to make, but for now these will do. So if I go back to the view I started with, the scene I started with, I believe it was a perspective of the second floor. Or section cross 3D. Oh, that was it. Yeah. Let's clean this up a little bit and remove the geometry that we used to develop we don't need any of this stuff, so I'm just closing these utilities. turn off the visibility of the stairwell volumes. What point of view am I looking at? I'd be looking at the front. Bless. Let's save this as a section cross. Orthographic, right? Section cross ortho. So we can recall it if we need to. So there are several things going on here. One, because I drew on that wall, we sketched on that wall to start to develop these arches, so I'm going to start erasing that geometry. It isn't connected to everything else is grouped, so we ought to be able to safely remove these elements. We should probably have these arches on layers. Let's see if we do. We don't yet. So, do we have these on any layers? No. So, let's create a layer called interior arches. Arches, interior. So I'm going to select those, move those to arches interior. Hide visibility of arches interior. Alright, and now we can start to remove the geometry that we did to scaffold our development of those arches. Let's erase these. They're no longer needed. And a half circle. I suspect the openings, the window openings are larger than the arch. We'll have to resolve, sort of the relationship between that arch and the opening that it frames. So it's got to fit within it naturally. So it may be that they need to be more narrow. And we need to copy these arches to the other end. They're also sitting on top of columnar elements. So in a very coarse way, we could take one of these columns and move a copy Let's see, we'll grab it by an endpoint that represents sort of the inside face of it. Tap the control key. And let's push it to somewhere where we know it's going to be aligned with the face of the wall, and then we can move it downwards. Right. It's probably larger than it needs to be, but this is a way to recycle, something we've already done. Blue axis, lock it into place, and select an edge of the floor. So now it sits on the floor. And we want to move it so that it is directly beneath those arches. So I'm going to select it from a midpoint, move in this direction on the red axis, and then snap to these aren't quite mirror images of each other. That will have to do. All right. Column could be more narrow. Let's look at the picture again. Oh, this is where we're... Column is more narrow, significantly more narrow than the arcade holding up the second floor. So let's go to the model. Let's make that unique. Edit, make, right click, make unique. And because it's engaged in the wall, I'm going to call this column pilaster, second floor. So these, okay. And now when I modify this, I may want to scale it about the red scale about the center. .5. Okay, so that's half that size. Now let's move it into place. Midpoint in group is what I want. Keep that red axis and snap to the midpoint of the column capital. Can I get that midpoint? There, I think that's it. Close that component. Capital, the column's okay, the capital's still too big. So there's a solid group that wants to be scaled by half. Uniform, about opposite point, 0.5. Did we scale it too much? Well, maybe we didn't want it uniform. Let's undo that. We like the height of it, but we might want to change the length of the width. This is probably more. complicated than we want it to be yet. Let's turn off view. Make some copies of this. From the midpoint, tap the Control key, red axis, and align to about that intersection. And we need one in the corner. We'll use the midpoint in the group, tap the Control key again, hold the red axis in place. Red axis to there. Midpoint again. And drag to red axis in place to about there. Again, red axis. Red axis to there. And finally, red axis to there. So the beauty of this is that once this is done, and we need to adjust those openings, you know, to fill in the spandrel residual spaces around the opening. The beauty about this is that we can copy that system to the opposite wall as well. So that's a lot of work for refinements. Let's stop there and continue copying that.